preternatural and liminal nightmarish horror. Horror is a very subjective thing. Some people enjoy horror comedies, some people enjoy, slasher films, gore, and some people enjoy the more psychological stuff. But what is actually scary? What is actually horrifying? What is actually terrifying? Today in this video, I'm going to be talking about 5 movies that actually scare me. Not all these movies are even explicitly horror films, but they all have things that scare me personally. You're bound to have heard of some or probably all of these movies. And unfortunately, for myself, as someone who is a fan of physical media, a huge proponent of it, I actually only own 2 of these movies, I'm embarrassed to say. Horror is an interesting thing because not all of these movies I'm going to be talking about are all the movies that have ever scared me ever. These are more like movies that still to this day, if I watch them, make me uncomfortable in ways that are different than, let's say, The Shining. The Shining is a scary movie. It is a great piece of horror cinema. It is high art. It doesn't scare me as much. I mean, in parts, don't get me wrong. It definitely has its moments that when they come up, I'm like, oh God, here we go. But it doesn't scare me as much as it used to when I was younger. The same with something like The Exorcist or The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which might be my favorite horror film of all time. Those movies are still scary, but there's levels to it. All right, so we're going to get into it here. The first movie I have is Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me. This is a prequel to the much lauded Twin Peaks series. Strange show, David Lynch, obviously, rest in peace. Esoteric, supernatural, murder mystery, thriller, and at times horror. David Lynch is not explicitly a horror director. However, when he does horror, when he sets his eyes on a scary scene, it is some of the scariest scenes I've ever seen. For example, the diner scene in Mulholland Drive. He literally tells, the characters are literally telling you what is about to happen, but the buildup is still scary anyway. Why? Because David Lynch, better than anyone else, could tap into the gray matter of our brains. He was able to portray the way nightmares feel. And that is exactly what Fire Walk with Me is. It is a nightmare. And it goes more into the origins of the terrible curse and things that led up to the murder of Laura Palmer. The horror in this movie, while it is supernatural, while it is esoteric and strange and otherworldly, a lot of the horror that's more effective to me in this is the real life horror. There are things in this that happen all the time to people, day in, day out. And it's terrifying when you realize that it's happening to someone who, Laura Palmer is not a perfect person, of course. But in the universe of Twin Peaks, she is the beacon of light and hope to counteract against the darkness of Bob and the woodsmen and all these other dark entities and creatures that habitate at the fringes and periphery of Twin Peaks. There are sounds and visuals and just moments in this movie that I sometimes wish I could unsee. I've only seen the film a couple times, whereas I've seen the series several times. And don't get me wrong, the series also has disturbing moments, of course. But Fire Walk with Me, it just goes above and beyond. Probably because it is a theatrical release, Lynch was able to push the boundaries a bit more. It starts off as kind of like a zany buddy cop detective story. Then it just devolves into this dark descent into preternatural and liminal nightmarish horror. And it just touches on things on the underbelly of society that we all know happens constantly. It happens to people that we see as models of our culture. It happens to, I mean, Laura Palmer is prom queen. She's dating the quarterback. And if you've seen the series, you know it's much more complicated than that. Next up, Pulse by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. I don't remember I don't remember exactly how I saw this movie for the first time, but it was many years ago. Now, it was after the technological elements of this movie, which came out in 2001. So even then, the technological elements in the movie that attribute very much to the horror were a bit dated, but it was still close enough in recent memory to be effective. I'm someone who is a millennial, so I remember all these things. Now, this movie starts off about a group of friends, coworkers really, who are shocked by the sudden suicide of one of their friends. And following his suicide, a situation unravels involving the early internet and Ghost using the internet as sort of a conduit or a portal to draw the living to the other side. I'm being very vague here. It's much more complicated than that. The thing about this movie I love the most, you're not going to get tricked into being scared. Visual jump scares are much more scary than auditory jump scares that are just loud and startle you. You didn't scare me, you just surprised me. Pulse has no cheap scares whatsoever. This movie, you could say, is more creepy than outright terrifying, but what it does, what it's very good at, is it bleeds into your subconscious. A lot of the times, the ghosts are not overtly haunting anyone. They're just sort of in the background, in the shadows, standing there. And there's scenes that where the audio just completely drops out and you're just looking at this shadowy figure. Anyone who has seen this movie knows about the hallway woman. The scene with the woman in the hallway is very chilling. And it's so chilling and influential that you can see echoes of it in modern horror, even up to recently as Obsession. There's an uncanniness to the way in which the ghosts operate in this film. It's very slow, it's very gradual. They very much feed off of despair and isolation and depression. Pulse, it was very ahead of its time. I mean, social media was not really a thing. I don't know, it wasn't a thing really at all back in 2001. Yeah, of course there was email. It's very prophetic in a lot of ways. And I think as more time goes on, even with the relatively dated technology of it, it doesn't really matter because now it's kind of done this thing where it circled back into the analog horror sphere. This movie was so ahead of the curve in a lot of ways in what we consider extremely scary now. You know, going back to the liminal, going back to the subliminal even. All right, so unfortunately, as I stated earlier, I those are the only two physical movies on this list that I own, which is really sad. I need to remedy that, of course. But moving on to movie number 3, Audition. Audition, for the longest time for me, was the scariest movie I had ever seen. And in a lot of ways, it was because, aside from some nightmare dream sequences and some scenes where you're not sure if this is the character's imagination or what have you, everything that happens in Audition could happen in real life. Audition is about this widower who's been alone for several years, and his friend who works in the film industry, they come up with a plan to hold an audition. But the audition is just a pretext because what they're actually doing is auditioning women to be this guy's next wife. You know, there's like this funny montage, but in retrospect is actually really creepy and strange. And then there's one girl who's very shy, very proper, prim, and just overall traditionally very feminine, which is what the protagonist is kind of looking for. And he falls in love, you know, basically instantaneously. But of course, this girl has a very dark past. But a first good part of the movie feels like a kind of romantic comedy in a lot of ways. And there's a nice little tender love story. A lot of people have compared this movie to Fatal Attraction. I've never seen Fatal Attraction, so I don't know. I'm sure it's similar. But it's scary not just because of men's innate fear of feminine nature, the wild chaos, Kali with her tongue out and her eyes wild. Our protagonist has no idea what is in store for him, and neither do we as the audience. One of the most terrifying movies I've ever seen. I think I've only seen it a couple times. All these movies I've only seen a handful of times just because they freak me out way too much. Right, so the fourth movie I'm going to be talking about is The Strangers. Out of all these movies, this is the one I saw the earliest. I think I actually saw it when it came out. It's about strangers knocking on this couple's door late at night, home invasion type stuff. It's a gut punch of a movie. But again, it's getting into that fine line between true crime and a little bit supernatural because of course the villains in the movie, they're not monsters in the mythical sense. They're not they don't have superpowers, but in some scenes it seems like they do. It seems like how did they get there? How did they get there? It seems like no matter what our main characters do, the antagonists in the story, the three strangers, are a dark omen of hopelessness. And you can draw a lot of themes from what these three represent, even if the original intent of the creators was just as simple as, okay, these people are invading these people's homes and they're torturing them and they're psychologically messing with them. There's something symbolic about a trio, a trinity of evil entities or beings that are preying upon the innocent. There's something there. It's just a movie that works really well with the minimalist plot that it has because this is an innate fear of everyone, you know? We all have our own caves and our own fires, and beyond the perimeter of that fire is danger. And that is what The Strangers plays on. It's that simple. Of course, the masks they wear are very creepy, but I think the masks are also symbolic of not only what is hidden, but what is being portrayed. All right, so the final movie on my list is going to be the war epic Come and See. Now, Come and See is not a horror film, but you actually could make the case that it is because it depicts horrifying things. It's a war film, it's a war movie. Come and See takes place in Belarus, I believe. There's not very many movies, or there's not enough movies that I've seen that handle the Belarusian people and what the Nazis did to them. And what I like about this movie the most, even though I might never watch it again, is the fact that, yes, there's violence, there's extremely disturbing imagery, but it's not overly exploitative. Exploitive? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't feel like it's shock for shock value. There is an overall message in the movie that it's trying to tell you. It's about the corruption of innocence. It's about the fact that all of us, every single human being, we start off as innocent. And that innocence can not only be forced away from us, but something else, something darker can be put in its place. Every single one of us walking around can become a monster and do monstrous deeds and commit horrific acts. We think we can't. If I lived back in that time, I would have shot Hitler. I would have killed Hitler if I was a time traveler. Maybe. You don't know that. And if I'm being honest, I don't know that about myself either. Because what humans are willing to do to survive, there's no limit to it. There's no limitations to it.